Hi everyone, welcome to this session. So let's understand what are events in JavaScript and how do we handle it. Alright, so events are actions or occurrences that happen in the browser, such as clicking a button, hovering over an element, or pressing a key, right? So this is a browser window, right? So what are the things that can be done on the browser? So either I can hover over an element, and let's say if there are here any buttons, then I can click on the buttons, or if there is an input box, I can type something on the input box, right? So what are those? Those are events that are happening in the browser, right? So that is what is called an event. All right, now what are the sources that can be for these events, right? So either you can use your mouse, right, your cursor to do these events. You can click the button using the cursor, you can type something using your keyboard. That means the source would be the keyboard, right? So based on that, I have categorized the event sources. So what could be the mouse event? So using your mouse, either you can click on a button, right? Let's say you can do a single click, you can do a double click, or you can use your cursor to just mouse over to an element or hover out from an element. So similarly, we have few events from the keyboard as well. So either you can press a key and then you can release a key, right? So key down and key up. And similarly, we have some form events. So let's say if there is a form, you are filling some information and then you click on submit, or let's say if there's an input box and you are typing and then retyping the values, right? If you're doing any sort of change. So those kind of events are called form events, right? And then there are some window events such as load of the page, reloading of the page, resize, or even scroll is also an event. Okay, so let's understand this by taking an example. So let's say you're sitting inside your house and someone rings the bell. So what are the things that are happening here, right? When somebody pressed your doorbell, you listen to it and then you go and open the door, right? So what is the event that happened? The event was ringing of the bell, right? So similarly here as well, whenever an event occurs in the browser, we have to add a listener. So in our analogy, the ear was the listener, right? That is why you could hear the bell. But here in JavaScript, we also have to add a listener. So when someone does something in the browser, if they are pressing a button or if they are typing something from the keyboard, all those are considered as an event. And whenever those sort of events happens, you need to have a listener in your JavaScript which listen to such events and then perform an action. All right, so I hope you got the idea now. So this is the syntax for adding an event. We will have to access the HTML element and then we have to just do dot add event listener, and depending on what kind of event it is, right? If it is a click event or if it is a double click event, so we have to decide based on what kind of element it is and what kind of event can occur, and then we have to mention the event name and then we have to write the action, right? That what should happen when that particular event occurs. All right, and these are the topics that we are going to cover in this session: how to add an event listener and how we can do the inline handling of the event in HTML itself, and what are the common event types, and we'll take some examples and then check them out. And after that, we'll also check what are event objects and properties. We'll see how we can remove an event listener, and then at last we'll discuss about event delegation. So let's just go ahead and get started with adding an event listener. Okay, so for this, I'll first open my HTML file, and here let's just go ahead and create a button first, and I'll give this button a name as click me. Okay, and then here I'll give an ID to the button. Let's say button ID. Let's save this. And so first of all, in our JavaScript file, we have to refer to this element because your JavaScript should know that for which element you want to add the listener for, right? So I want to add a listener for this button. So we will first access this element in our JavaScript file, and we'll do it by using the ID. So I'll copy the ID and I'll go to the JavaScript file and let's just access the button element. So I'll take something like let button element, and then this is how we access the HTML element, document.getElement by ID. And what's the ID that we have copied? This one, right? So now we have the element. What is the second step? The second step is that you have to add the listener, right? Otherwise JavaScript will not be listening to any event that will happen in the browser. So what is the button element? This is the button element, and I want to add a listener. So add event listener. This is the method. Okay, and inside this, if we go back, if we just scroll up and see the syntax, right? So this is the syntax, right? Dot add event listener, then you have to mention the event name and then the function. So what is the event that can happen here, right? Someone will click on the button, right? Either single click or double click. So let's write it for single click. So I'll just copy this, and you cannot mess up with the spellings here, right? So if there is something which is in lowercase, you exactly have to write that in lowercase, right? You cannot just make C as a capital and then L small letter and then C again capital. Do not do that. Okay, it won't work. So let's just copy this and mention the event here. So double quotes event, and then we have to add a function. So function, and then here let's just add an alert for now, alert, and I'll write button click. Let's just save this and click on this button. So now you see that this is working. All we did was create a button in the HTML file and then access that button element in our JavaScript file, and then we added a event event listener, the click event, and then we have added in the function, we have just added an alert. And of course, there are different ways of writing this. If you wanted to write it directly, you could have done that as well. So if I just take this, right, dot add event listener, so I can simply write it like this, and this will still work. Okay. Now let's move to the next topic and see how we can do inline event handling. So this one, inline means that you can handle the events in HTML file itself. Okay. So I'll just remove this for now and we'll go to the HTML file. And here on the button, so there's something there's something that we can do here. There's something called on click. So I'll just do on click, and here itself I will add an alert, button clicked. Okay. And if I save this and if I click on the button, it gives me the alert, right? Here also you have to be careful when you're writing this, right? Because this has to be exactly the way I've written here, right? You cannot make the C as capital, otherwise it won't work. All right. So this is how you can do the inline event handling. All right. Now what was the next topic that we have to check? Let's just check some common event types now. So click we already checked. Now let's just check mouse over. So I'll go to my HTML file and I'm going to add another element, or we can work with this element itself, which I have here. So I'll just give this element an ID and I'll say header ID and I'll save this. So let's just copy the ID and we'll go to the JavaScript file. So we'll first access the element, right? So let header element and document.get element by ID, document.get element by ID. What's the ID? This is the ID, right? Now we'll add a event listener. So header element dot add event listener. And what is the event listener that we want to add? It's mouse over. Let's just change the color on mouse over and mouse out. Okay. What's the name of mouse over event? Let's just copy this and I'll add this here, and then we have to write a function, and inside this dot style, these are the properties. Okay, color, and I'll make it as red. Let's save this and then see what happens. So here you see the color is changing, right, on mouse over. And let's also add another event on mouse out. Okay, so I'll just copy the same thing, and here rather than mouse over, I'll just include mouse out, and I'll save this. Here I'll change the color to green. Now let's see. Okay, so red and then green. Okay, so this is how you can handle different type of events. Now let's just check these two as well, right? Key down and then submit. So for key down, I'll press something from my keyboard and then I want to log those keys, right? Whatever I'm pressing from the keyboard. So for that, let's just first create an input element here. Input, and let the type be text itself, and I'll give an ID, input ID, and then let's just add a placeholder and I'll say type something. Okay, so now we have the input box, and I'll take the ID of this input box and I'll go to my JavaScript file, and let's just remove this input element here, document dot get element by ID. What's the ID? This is the ID. Okay, and then input element dot add event listener, and I want to add this event key down. All right, so key down, and then here function. But there's another thing here. Okay, so if I just simply do like this, let's say I want to print the value, right? So whatever I will be typing from my keyboard into this input box, I want that value. And where is that value? That value is inside the event object. So I have to receive the event object as well. Okay, so event object here, and then let me just log that value. So log, and then here I'll just give a text first, key pressed, and here event dot key. This is how we can actually access and see, like, what's the key that is being pressed from the keyboard. Okay, so here if I type in, let's say U, right? So here you see in the console, it says key pressed U. If I type in H, it says key pressed H, right? See, it's even tracking the backspace, right? So it's tracking every key that I'm pressing from the keyboard. Okay, so this is how, like, if there is anything that you want to implement and if you want to track such events, then you can do in this way. All right, now let's check that let's see how we can handle the submit event. So let's go to the HTML file and let's create a form. So I'll remove this and I will go ahead and create a form. So form action submit, and inside the form I'll create an input element. Actually, let's not give any action. I'll just give an ID and let's give it as my form. Input element would be text, and let's give it an ID as input element, and let's also create a button. Okay, I'll give this button a name as submit, and I'll give an ID to this. So submit button. All right, let's save this. Now let's receive this form. Okay, we don't have to receive each and every element for now. Let's only receive the form. I'll take the form. So form element. So here document dot get element by ID. And what's the ID of the form? I think it was, yeah, my form. And then I'll take this. So we have the ID now. And then let's add the event listener. So form element dot add event listener. What is the event that we want in this one, right? So submit event. And then what do we want to do? We'll just print a message. Before we log any message, right? First we would have to prevent the default action that happens on the submit, because we are not actually submitting it to anywhere, right? So we will just first prevent the default thing that happens, right? And for that we have a method. So I'll write, so here for that we would have to access event object from here, and I'll type in event dot prevent default. Okay, so that whatever happens by default, that should be stopped. Okay, and then we'll log a message form submitted. Let's just type a random thing and then click on submit. So you see, and also everything that we are doing, right, everything is getting stored in this event object. So if you log the event object, right, so let me just log it. So log, and if I just log the event object, let's save this, and I would have to type in something and then click on submit. Now if you see this event object, right, let me just make some space here. So here if you see, it has all the information, right, that we have a submit event, we have the form, and these are the values, right? And if you see the target, right, under target you will see a lot of other information. For example, so basically it's overloaded with information, right? And if you scroll down, I think for example the prevent default should also be visible somewhere here. So see, the ID of the form is my form, and then there is an inner text of submit, and then it is also showing us the inner HTML. All right, so every time you get confused, right, you can always print this event object, as in log this event object, and then check the properties, right? These are all the properties which you can access in your logic. All right, let's take the h1 tag again, and then maybe it will be easier to understand it from here. So I'll receive this again. So header element document dot get element by ID, and then I'll just mention the ID. Okay, and then I'll add an event listener here. So header element dot add event listener, and let's say if I type in mouse over. Okay, so mouse over, and here in the function I will receive the event. Okay, and then I will print it. So if I print the event now, let's just save this. If I do this, right, see, the moment I did a hover, it showed me the event. And if I open the event, it is giving me, see this, it is giving me a lot of other information. For example, if you see client X, client Y, these are the coordinates, right, for this particular element. Okay, and then what else do we have? We have the type of the event, right? So all this information will be inside the event object. So for example, now let's say if for some certain reason you want to access the coordinates of the element, then you can access that element, right? So client X, client Y. So let's say if I want to access these two, so let's say if I want to say X coordinate, then I will just access it by doing this. So here event dot, what is it, client X, right, client X. And then if I save this, see, now I got the X coordinate, right? And similarly, if I want to access the Y coordinate, I can do the same way. So whatever properties that you see under event object, all those properties you can access based on your requirement. Okay, so see, I'm getting both the coordinates for this particular element on the page, web page. All right, now let's check how we can remove an event listener. So I'll go back to the HTML and I'll only keep the button here. So let me remove this, and let me remove this as well. I'll keep the button and I'll name it as something else. Okay, and I'll take the ID of the button. Let's just access this here first. Button element document dot get element by ID. This is the button element, and I'm going to add an alert first. So we'll add the event listener, and then I'll show you how we have to remove the event listener. Okay, so button element dot add event listener. So here if I'm adding an event for click, and let's write the function here. So you know what, rather than writing the function here, I'll just call a function. Okay, for example, I'll call the function show alert, and then I'll close this. Okay, so either I could have written the function here itself, or I can just call the function. I'll write this function separately. Okay, so I've added the event here, event listener here. Now when I am implementing this function, okay, show alert, inside this I'll do two things. First of all, I'll add an alert here, right, of course. So let me first add the alert. So alert, and it will say button clicked. And after this, right, when this function is called and after the button is clicked, the moment button is clicked once, I will immediately remove the event listener. Okay, and how do I do that? Button dot remove event listener, remove, it should give me some, okay, remove event listener. And what is the event that we want to remove? It's the click event, and the function should be this itself. Okay, but you don't need to add parentheses, right? Otherwise it will go into recursion. So this, and then that's it. So let me save this. So this is only going to get executed once. Okay, so if I click on the button, it will show me the alert, but after that it shouldn't show me the alert, right? Because the moment it shows the alert, we are executing this line, so it should remove the event listener. So if I click on it, it showed me the button click, but now if I click on the button, it shouldn't show me the alert, right? Of course, like, if I reload the page, then it will happen again, right? If I reload the page, click on the button, it will show, but after that, right, without reloading, if I keep on clicking it, it won't show me the alert again, right? Now let's understand what is event delegation. Okay, so I'll just scroll down a bit, and here, so event delegation. So we use event delegation when we want to dynamically create HTML elements. Okay, so let me show you that by using an example. Okay, so I'll go to my HTML first and I'll remove this button. Okay, and here I'm going to create a list. Okay, so here, and then I'll give this an ID, item list, and then inside this I will mention the list items. Okay, so for example, if I mention one list item as item 1, so you see the item 1 came here, right? And then if I add another item as item 2, this will also show up, and then I'll add another item as item 3. Okay, then this will show up as well. Now let's say if you have a certain requirement where you don't know what the list item is going to be, right? So you cannot in advance, you cannot mention that how many li tags you have to write here, right? So let's say if there is anything which will get created dynamically, right, and you have to update the list dynamically, as in add something to the add item to the list. So how will you dynamically create another li element, right? So I mean, you have to write a logic in your JavaScript so that when there is a new item, then it should dynamically create your list item and then add it here. Okay, so that is what is event delegation. So let's just go ahead and see how we can do that. So we will first, so let's create a button here as well. Okay, so button, and here I'll give it a name as add item, and let's give this button an ID, button ID, and let's save this. So I need two elements from HTML in my JavaScript. Okay, so the first one is this list and then the button, because on the click of this button, I want to add the item here. Okay, dynamically. So I'll take the button and I'll go back to the JavaScript. So here, let's first take the button element. So let button element, and here document dot get element by ID, and this is my button ID. Okay, and the second element that I want is list element. So here document dot get element by ID, and what's the ID of the list? This is the ID. So here, and we'll take these two. Now, where do we need to add event listener? On the click of the button, right? So what is the button element? This dot add event listener. And what is the event click? When someone clicks on this button, what should happen? I'll write a function, and I want to add a new list element, and I want this logic to be in such a way that it also dynamically creates a list element in my HTML file. Okay, so here first we need a variable for the new element, right? So here I'll say let new item, and then we have a method in document object which is create element. And what kind of element we have to create? List element, right? Li. What is the tag name? It's Li, correct? Li, right? So even for the new item, we need the same tag, right? So that is what we are passing it over here. So create element and then the tag name. And then what should be the content of the element, right? That you also need to mention, right? Okay, that you are creating this tag, but what do you want to keep in that tag? So new item dot text content is equal to, so let's say I'm giving it as item 4. Okay, so item 4, and then now two things have already happened, right? This element is created, and this item we have already said that, okay, this is the item text content that we want to set. All right, now we also have to append this to where? To this list, right? So this is the ID, and we have already taken the element. So let's just go ahead and then up, because these are the child elements of ul tag, right? So we will just append, we'll use the append child method and then add it over here. So here new item dot, not new item. So what is the list element? This is the list element dot append child, and what do we want to append? New item, right? So new item, and then let's just save this and check it out. So if I click on add item, you see the new item got added. All right, and then there is something else that you can do here. So right now, if you see, I'm hard coding the text content, right? So let's create an input box here, and whatever user types in the input and clicks on add item, it should keep on adding, right? So let me go back to the HTML and I'll create an input box here. So input text would be this itself, and let's just give it an ID, input box, and I'll give a placeholder, type item name. Let's just save this, and I'll take the ID of this input box. I'll go back to the JavaScript and I'll access this element as well first. So let input ID, and then document dot get element by ID. And what's the ID of the input box? This is the ID of the input box. Okay, so here what I'll do is I'll take the value, right? Because I just do not need the input box reference. I need the value, whatever user is going to type inside this. Okay, so that is why I'll mention the value over here. So value. So now if I give this value to here, then it should work. If I click on save and let me type here something, let's say item 5, and if I click on add item, okay, the value is not showing up. So let's just do one thing. Let's just directly give this here. Okay, I'll do this and I'll access the element directly here when I'm assigning it. So I'll type it here and then I'll save this. And here, if I now add item 5, if I click, see, item 5 got added. Let's say if I add another item, if I click on it, see, so it is all happening dynamically, right? Because item 1, 2, 3, now I do not even need this. Okay, so if I remove this and if I save this, right, there is no item here. But now let's say if I add item 1 and if I click on add item, item 1 got added, item 2, this will get added, and if I add item 3, this will get added as well, right? Because it is dynamically creating the element and adding it to the list. All right, so this is what we call event delegation. All right, so I think this is good enough for you to get started on event handling. All right, so I think that's it for now, and I'll see you in the next one.